Something moved through the water toward the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps that no Iranian radar operator was trained to detect, no Iranian coastal defense system was configured to stop, and no Iranian naval commander had ever war-gamed into their defensive contingency planning. Not a cruise missile descending from altitude, not a torpedo launched from a submarine, not a combat diver swimming through the darkness. Something that traveled at over 40 miles per hour across the surface of the Persian Gulf with no human pilot aboard, no radio signal that could be jammed, no cockpit that defensive fire could target, and no hesitation encoded anywhere in its programming. An autonomous, unmanned surface vessel packed with explosives, guided by artificial intelligence, launched in combat by the United States military for the first time in American history, driving itself directly into the IRGC's coastal naval infrastructure with the same expendable kamikaze logic that Iran's own Shahed drones have been applying to civilian shipping in the Strait of Hormuz for months. Iran brought the Mosquito fleet. The United States brought the electric bug zapper. And the bug zapper just made its combat debut in the most strategically critical waterway on Earth. But the autonomous attack sea drones are not even the most consequential development from the strike package in which they debuted. And that statement alone should stop you cold, because the first combat deployment of autonomous attack sea drones by any American military force in history is an enormous development by any normal standard of military significance. The fact that it is not the most consequential thing that happened in this operational window tells you something critical about the pace and the scale at which this conflict is now evolving. And about a presidential declaration made in the same 72-hour window that will be analyzed in strategic studies programs around the world for the next decade. But let's back all the way up, because to understand what the sea drone deployment means for the strategic architecture of the Strait of Hormuz going forward, and why the president's statement about the United States becoming the permanent guardian of the strait is the most operationally significant political declaration of this entire conflict, you need to understand the full sequence of what has been building across 4 consecutive nights of escalating American strikes, and why each wave was specifically designed to be larger and more comprehensive than the one before it. The Memorandum of Understanding gave Iran an off-ramp. That is the diplomatic fact at the foundation of everything that has happened since. The agreement required one thing from the Islamic Republic: 60 days of not attacking ships in the Strait of Hormuz, not regime change, not disarmament, not the abandonment of the nuclear program. 60 days of leaving civilian mariners alone in an international waterway that international maritime law already guaranteed them the right to transit freely. Iran's parliamentary speaker signaled acceptance. Then he walked it back. Then the IRGC attacked the Cyprus-flagged container ship GFS Galaxy, set it ablaze, caused engine room damage severe enough to force the crew to abandon ship, and left 1 crew member missing. Then the IRGC declared the strait closed, claiming that vessels were required to coordinate with Iranian forces before transiting, a claim that would effectively establish Iranian toll booth authority over 20% of the world's oil supply. Then they fired what they called a warning shot at a second vessel, stopping it dead in the water. The IRGC's interpretation of the Memorandum of Understanding was this: the agreement gave Iran the legal authority to direct ships through the strait, and their definition of directing ships included attacking any vessel that did not follow the specific route their naval commanders designated. A Shahed drone through the bridge of a cargo ship was, in the IRGC's framing, a form of maritime guidance. An explosive warhead through an engine room was navigational assistance. The crew member who went missing after being forced to abandon a burning vessel was collateral benefit of Iranian safety enforcement in an international waterway. That is not a negotiating position. That is the behavior of an organization that signed an agreement with no intention of honoring any interpretation of it, except the one that maximized its own coercive control over the world's most critical maritime choke point. And it is the behavior that produced, in direct causal sequence, 4 consecutive nights of American strikes that have now destroyed more than 300 Iranian military targets and introduced autonomous combat sea drones to the Persian Gulf theater in a way that permanently changes the nature of maritime warfare in confined waterways. United States Central Command's response to the strait closure and the GFS Galaxy attack was not another strongly worded statement. It was not a diplomatic protest routed through Omani intermediaries. It was a targeting list delivered in 7 words across 2 sentences. Iran does not control the strait. Traffic is flowing. Then they pressed to execute on 4 consecutive nights of strike packages, each one larger than the last, building toward a cumulative operational picture that the IRGC's degraded command structure is only beginning to fully comprehend. Night 1, approximately 80 targets. Night 2, approximately 90. Night 3, 140. Night 4, the multi-domain strike architecture that assembled every available American offensive capability in the theater simultaneously for the first time in this conflict, and added something the IRGC had never encountered before in any previous engagement: Now let's talk about the weapons package assembled for that fourth strike, because the specific combination of platforms, munitions, and autonomous systems deployed represents something qualitatively different from the first 3 nights of the campaign. It is not just more of the same. It is the validation in live combat of a multi-domain targeting chain that had never been tested against a real adversary in a real operational environment. And that, having been validated, changes the strategic options available to the American military in confined maritime environments for decades to come. The F-35 Lightning II. Al-Hughes led the strike package as it has led every previous package in this campaign. The stealth door kicker that penetrates Iranian air defense using its low radar cross-section and advanced electronic warfare suite to suppress the threat environment before fourth-generation platforms enter the operational space. The F-35 is not just a strike aircraft in this context. It is a networked intelligence platform operating in Iranian airspace at the moment when close-range reconnaissance is most operationally valuable. Its sensor fusion system integrates radar data, infrared imagery, and electronic warfare information into a unified situational awareness picture that allows the pilot to identify, classify, and target Iranian military assets, while simultaneously providing that targeting data to every other platform in the strike package through the same communication network connecting the entire coalition force structure. Behind the F-35's F-18 Super Hornets launching off carrier decks in the Arabian Sea on night sorties, carrying precision munitions to targets that the F-35's earlier passes had already cleared of active air defense capability. F-16CJ Wild Weasels running suppression of enemy air defenses with AGM-88 HARM missiles that home on the radar emission of surface-to-air missile systems, tracking the radar beam back to its source and destroying the launcher before it can engage American strike aircraft. Every radar that illuminates becomes a target. Every surface-to-air missile system that tries to engage American aircraft guides American anti-radiation missiles directly to itself. The air defense suppression campaign has been so thorough, across 4 consecutive nights, that Iranian radar operators on the coast who have survived the previous strike packages are, if they are tactically rational, keeping their systems in passive mode rather than illuminating and announcing their position to harm shooters waiting for exactly that signal. Now enter the Locust drone. The low-cost unmanned aerial vehicle swarming technology system built at $35,000 per unit is a platform whose operational significance in the fourth strike package goes far beyond its individual capability. $35,000. For context, a single IRGC patrol boat of the larger variants costs millions. A single HARM missile costs several $100,000. A single F-18 sortie's operational cost runs into the hundreds of thousands per flight hour. The Locust is a $35,000 expendable kamikaze drone modeled on, reverse engineered from, in the most deliberate and symbolically resonant operational sense, Iran's own Shahed 136. The same delta-wing kamikaze drone that Russia has been using against Ukrainian cities, the same design that the IRGC has been deploying against commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. The United States military took Iran's own weapon, studied it, improved on it with better avionics, better artificial intelligence, better guidance accuracy, and launched it back at the IRGC in combat. The Locust carries approximately 18 kilograms of explosives. It launches from combat ships and flies autonomously to its target without a human in the guidance loop on the terminal phase of the mission. Target designation happens prior to launch. Execution happens autonomously. The artificial intelligence makes the final guidance decisions. There is no radio link to jam. There is no operator to kill. There is no hesitation, no self-preservation instinct, no threat reaction that defensive fire can induce in a platform with no pilot. It flies to the target, and it detonates. And the SHIELD AI collaborative autonomy system adds the layer that transforms individual Locust drones from effective individual weapons into a networked, coordinated swarm. The hive-mind artificial intelligence allows multiple drones in the theater to communicate with each other and with manned fighter jets simultaneously, coordinating their targeting and approach to maximize the cumulative effect of multiple simultaneous impacts against the same distributed target set. This is not a future capability being tested in a laboratory. This is a capability that was validated in live combat against real Iranian targets in the Persian Gulf, producing real operational effects that CENTCOM released footage of. The multi-domain targeting chain is not theoretical anymore. It is operational, proven, and will be employed with expanding confidence in expanding numbers of autonomous systems in every subsequent operational window for as long as this campaign continues. But the most strategically significant development in this fourth strike package is what happened on the water itself. The autonomous unmanned surface vessels, attack sea drones traveling at over 40 miles per hour toward the IRGC's coastal naval infrastructure with no human pilot aboard and no ability for the IRGC to deter them through the threat of defensive fire that risks American lives in return. The manufacturer has been kept classified by CENTCOM. The operational security of concealing exactly which platform was used prevents the IRGC from tailoring its countermeasures to specific technical characteristics. But defense analysts pointing to fleet-class unmanned surface vessels as the most likely candidates have noted that Saronic Technologies' Corsair unmanned surface vehicle has been operating in the Strait under Task Force 59, the Navy's Unmanned Systems Task Force in the 5th Fleet Area of Operations, providing the operational baseline experience that made the combat deployment possible. Task Force 59 was established specifically to integrate unmanned and autonomous systems into the 5th Fleet's operational architecture. Its mission from inception was to explore how unmanned surface, subsurface, and aerial platforms could be networked together under AI-assisted coordination to extend American maritime awareness and eventually offensive capability across a theater where the IRGC's geographic positioning and swarm doctrine created specific tactical challenges for conventional force employment. What has happened in the Strait is the operational debut of what Task Force 59 has been building toward since it was created. Consider what the autonomous surface vessel deployment means for Bandar Abbas, the port that has long been the IRGC Navy's primary hub in the Persian Gulf, where Iran has invested significant resources in hardening, concealing, and protecting its fast attack craft inside coastal cave facilities and hardened shelters specifically designed to complicate air-delivered munition targeting. Surface sea drones traveling at 40 miles per hour through the approaches to Bandar Abbas do not care about hardened shelters. They do not need to drop munitions from altitude and wait for them to penetrate reinforced structures. They navigate to the target, and they deliver their explosives on contact. A fast attack craft concealed in a cave facility along the Iranian coastline that can survive an air-dropped bomb may not survive a sea drone that navigates into the cave entrance at 40 miles per hour with 18 kilograms of explosives, and no pilot whose survival instinct can be exploited by defensive fire. The IRGC's investment in coastal concealment infrastructure was designed around the threat model of air-delivered munitions. It was not designed around a swarm of autonomous kamikaze boats that can operate in the same confined coastal spaces where the IRGC's assets are hidden that cost $35,000 per unit while each target they destroy is worth millions, and that coordinate their attacks through an AI architecture that does not degrade under the simultaneous target saturation that the IRGC's own swarm doctrine was designed to produce against human-operated defensive systems. This is the specific inversion that defines the strategic significance of the sea drone combat debut. The IRGC built its entire Strait of Hormuz strategy on the premise of being the cheap, numerous, expendable side of the asymmetric equation. Hundreds of fast attack boats, thousands of Shahed drones, ballistic missiles in the hundreds, all cheap relative to the expensive, crew-dependent American platforms that would have to respond to them. The strategic logic was sound in the context it was designed for. If you can put enough cheap, expendable threats into a confined waterway simultaneously, you overwhelm the cost per engagement calculation of the defender. Each American interceptor missile costs more than the Shahed drone it destroys. Each American patrol operation costs more than the Iranian speedboat it is protecting commercial shipping from. At scale and sustained over time, that cost asymmetry produces political pressure on the American side that the IRGC was counting on to eventually force a negotiated settlement on favorable terms. The autonomous combat sea drone reverses that asymmetry completely. Now the IRGC's fast attack boats, which exist in finite numbers and require trained crews to operate, are the expensive and irreplaceable assets in the engagement. The sea drones, which can be manufactured rapidly in significant numbers, require no crews and cost a fraction of the platforms they are designed to destroy, are the cheap and expendable side. The IRGC designed a cheap swarm capability to defeat an expensive adversary. It now faces a cheap swarm adversary of its own, operating without crews, without the loss aversion that comes from risking human lives, and with an AI targeting coordination architecture that does not degrade under simultaneous threat presentation the way human operators do. Now let's go to the presidential statement, because it is the development that reframes everything else in the strategic picture and that deserves the most careful analytical attention of anything that happened in this operational window. President Trump, asked about Iran's claims to have closed the Strait of Hormuz, said the following: "We are taking over the strait. They have nothing. We are just going to hit them very hard, and we are going to keep the strait, and we will probably run it." And then he added the phrase that changes the entire strategic framework. "We will become the guardian of the strait. We should be reimbursed for that. We guarded it for nothing, and now we are going to guard it. We are going to get paid for guarding it." Read that again. The President of the United States is not describing a military objective of restoring the pre-conflict status quo to the Strait of Hormuz. He is not describing a campaign goal of deterring future IRGC harassment of commercial shipping until a diplomatic settlement can be reached. He is describing the permanent assumption of operational control over the most strategically important maritime choke point on Earth. and the establishment of a fee structure under which the United States would be compensated by the global community for the military services it is providing in keeping that waterway open. This declaration changes the nature of what the American military campaign in the Strait is for. Every previous framework for understanding American military action in this confrontation described the goal as restoring conditions for commercial shipping to transit freely, which implies a temporary intervention that ends when those conditions are achieved. The Guardian Declaration describes something permanent, a structural role, an ongoing function, an institutional position that the United States is asserting with the intention of maintaining indefinitely, with the associated economic arrangement that makes the cost of maintaining it sustainable as a long-term policy rather than a temporary military operation. The IRGC declared the Strait their territory. The President of the United States responded by saying, "The United States is taking it over, will run it, and will be paid for doing so." At the exact moment the declaration was being made, the Fourth Strike Package was executing against Iranian military targets using weapon systems that had never been deployed in combat before. The gap between what Iran claimed and what the United States demonstrated is not a negotiating space. It is the operational distance between an institution that signed an agreement it had no intention of honoring and the most powerful military force in human history that has now decided that the era of tolerating that behavior in the world's most important waterway is permanently over. The IRGC's response to the scale of what is happening to it has been revealing in ways that require careful analytical reading rather than dismissal. Iranian state media ran a front-page headline in the hours following the Fourth Strike Package reading, "Get ready for sudden death," accompanied by photographs of American leadership. This is not a strategic communication. This is a psychological response to an operational situation that is deteriorating faster than the regime's public narrative can manage. Organizations that are winning do not put assassination threats on their front pages. Organizations that have run out of operational responses proportional to the challenge they face reach for the most extreme symbolic gestures available to them, because extreme symbolic gestures are the only remaining tool that does not require operational capacity the institution no longer possesses. The mysterious strikes that occurred after CENTCOM stated it had concluded its third strike package deserve specific analytical attention, because they reveal something critical about the multi-actor environment in which this conflict is now operating. Nobody claimed responsibility for those strikes. Iran's parliament specifically warned that the UAE would pay the price for what it described as a behind-the-scenes role. Whether those strikes were Israeli, Emirati, or the action of some other actor whose public acknowledgement of participation would carry unacceptable diplomatic costs does not change the operational reality they represent. There are now actors operating against Iranian military targets in this theater who are not the United States, who are not claiming their operations publicly, and whose participation the Iranian government cannot definitively attribute, and therefore cannot formally respond to through its established escalation channels. An IRGC command structure already operating under maximum pressure from the confirmed American campaign, now absorbing strikes from unattributed actors it cannot formally engage, is a command structure whose decision-making bandwidth has been pushed to its maximum simultaneously. The multi-actor dimension of the conflict, America openly, others quietly, all converging against the same target set, represents an operational environment that the IRGC's command architecture was never designed to manage. Now, let's place the autonomous weapons deployment within the three converging pressure tracks that have been operating against the Islamic Republic simultaneously, because the Sea Drone combat debut adds a dimension to each track that the preceding phases of the campaign did not produce. The military pressure track has entered its most technologically advanced phase. The Fourth Strike Package validated in live combat a multi-domain targeting chain integrating fifth-generation stealth strike aircraft, fourth-generation precision strike aircraft, anti-radiation missile shooters, $35,000 autonomous aerial kamikaze drones, and first-ever combat deployed autonomous attack sea vessels operating at 40 miles per hour against coastal naval infrastructure. 300 confirmed targets destroyed. American aircraft operating over Iranian territory with no meaningful air defense opposition. 2 carrier strike groups providing strike capacity that exceeds anything the IRGC's current state can contest. And the multi-domain targeting chain that was validated in the Fourth Strike Package will be employed in every subsequent operational window, with expanding confidence, expanding target sets, and expanding numbers of autonomous systems, as more units are brought forward from the logistics chain behind the carrier strike groups. The financial pressure track has accumulated damage across every dimension of Iran's military-economic ecosystem. The rail bridge to Chinese military resupply is destroyed. The Polak petrochemical refinery that produced chemical inputs for ballistic missile and drone manufacturing is destroyed. Port infrastructure across the southern coast is systematically damaged. The IRGC's fast attack boat fleet, the primary instrument of strait harassment that the entire campaign was launched to neutralize, has been decimated across 4 nights of airstrikes and is now being additionally engaged by autonomous sea drones that can reach into the coastal cave facilities and hardened berths where survivors of the air campaign have sought shelter. The financial foundations of the IRGC's operational continuity are eroding faster than the ballistic missile launches against Gulf state targets can slow down. The psychological pressure track is operating at maximum intensity on 3 simultaneous audience layers in ways that the autonomous sea drone deployment specifically amplifies, beyond what the air campaign alone produced. Inside Iran, an IRGC coastal commander who survived 4 nights of American airstrikes now faces a completely different threat category arriving from a completely different vector at a completely different speed. The psychological burden of defending against a threat that has no human pilot, no radio link, no observable preparation signature, and costs $35,000 per unit while each target it destroys is worth millions is not a burden that surviving IRGC personnel were trained, equipped, or psychologically prepared to manage simultaneously with everything else being applied to their institution. On the regional level, the validation of autonomous sea drone combat in the Persian Gulf is a demonstration that every maritime nation and every naval command planning for conflict in confined waterways is absorbing and analyzing. The concept that Ukraine proved against Russia's Black Sea Fleet has now been validated by the most sophisticated military force on Earth at the world's most strategically important maritime choke point. The implications extend to every confined maritime environment where conventional naval assets have historically operated with an assumed level of protection that autonomous systems with no human risk profile can now fundamentally challenge. Taiwan Strait planning, South China Sea contingencies, Baltic Sea operations. Every strategic geography where cheap autonomous maritime systems can be deployed in volume against expensive conventional naval assets is being reconsidered by every military planning staff on Earth in the light of what just happened in the Strait. Go inside the command architecture of the Islamic Republic at this specific moment, because the decisions being made by whoever remains in operational command are being made in an environment of profound information, deprivation, and structural disorientation. Radar operators who illuminate their systems to track American aircraft guide harm missiles directly to their location. Commanders who communicate through radio links create electronic signatures that American signals intelligence tracks to source. The coastal command structure in the Strait of Hormuz region is operating with degraded surveillance, degraded communications, degraded naval assets, and now the additional threat of autonomous sea drones that can approach coastal positions through the same channels that small fishing vessels use without presenting the radar signatures, radio emissions, or observable preparation activity that previously gave IRGC defensive forces warning of incoming threats. And the ballistic missile launches continuing from Iran's interior are the most operationally durable remaining offensive capability the IRGC has, precisely because the mobile transporter erector launchers can relocate across Iranian territory in ways that 4 nights of coastal and maritime-focused strikes have not fully neutralized. But durable does not mean effective. The ballistic missiles being launched are being fired at Gulf partner nations and American military facilities against hardened targets protected by active, multi-layered integrated air defense systems, whose intercept record against Iranian launches in this conflict has been consistently high. The IRGC is consuming finite, irreplaceable ballistic missile inventory at a rate that its degraded production pipeline, with the petrochemical supply chain disrupted and the Chinese resupply rail corridor destroyed, cannot regenerate at matching pace. The magazine is running down, the replacement parts are not coming in, the production facility that made the propellant is on fire. The mathematics of that convergence has a terminal point. The structural risk that sits at the center of this operational picture is not another Iranian missile salvo. It is the command fragmentation scenario in an environment where novel autonomous weapons are now operating simultaneously with conventional strikes in the same geographic space. When autonomous sea drones are moving through the Strait of Hormuz at the same time, American manned aircraft are conducting strikes on coastal targets, while IRGC commanders are operating with degraded communications and incomplete situational awareness. The risk of misidentification, unintended engagement, or escalatory incident that none of the human decision-makers in any command chain authorized becomes elevated in ways that are genuinely difficult to model in advance. Autonomous systems operate within pre-programmed targeting parameters. Parameters set before an operation encounters all of the real-world complexity of an active combat environment are not always sufficient to prevent outcomes that the humans who set them did not foresee. The gap between pre-programmed intent and real-world execution is the place where the most consequential, unexpected developments in the history of automated warfare have historically occurred. This is the honest strategic assessment of the autonomous weapons deployment. The sea drones are operationally transformative. They are strategically decisive in what they do to the IRGC's cost calculation for strait confrontation. They are historically significant as the first combat-validated autonomous attack maritime system in American military history, and they carry within their operational deployment a specific category of risk that no targeting parameter, however carefully set, can completely eliminate in the complex, multi-actor, degraded communication environment of an active naval confrontation. The Locust drone at $35,000 per unit and 18 kilograms of explosive payload is one of the most significant weapons developments in the modern history of maritime conflict. Not because of what it accomplished in its combat debut, as significant as that debut was, because of what it represents going forward. The democratization of strike capability in confined maritime environments, the ability to generate offensive effects against naval targets at a cost-per-strike ratio that allows volume engagement at scales previously impossible with manned aircraft or expensive precision munitions, and the irreversible operational precedent that once an autonomous weapon system has been used in combat and demonstrated its effectiveness against a real adversary in a real environment, it becomes a permanent part of the operational toolkit deployed in every subsequent conflict where the conditions favor its employment. The IRGC spent decades building the Mosquito fleet as its primary instrument of strategic coercion in the Strait of Hormuz. It spent years and billions of dollars constructing the coastal cave facilities and hardened berths designed to protect that fleet from air-delivered munitions. It invested in the swarm doctrine that was supposed to overwhelm the cost per engagement calculation of any American defensive response. And it built all of this on the foundational assumption that the asymmetry of the engagement, cheap Iranian offensive platforms against expensive American defensive responses, would eventually produce the political pressure that would force an American withdrawal from the conflict on terms favorable to Tehran. The autonomous combat sea drone reverses every element of that foundational assumption. The cheap, numerous, expendable autonomous side of the engagement is no longer the IRGC's side. The system that does not care about crew casualties is no longer the IRGC's system. The platform that costs $35,000 while its target costs millions is no longer an Iranian platform launched at American shipping. It is an American platform launched at Iranian naval assets, and it coordinates with other platforms of the same type through an AI architecture that does not experience the cognitive throughput limitations that human operators face under swarm saturation conditions, which means the very doctrine the IRGC built its deterrence around has been turned against it by a platform it never wargamed into its defensive planning. Iran brought the Mosquito fleet to the Strait of Hormuz. The United States brought the Bug Zapper. But the Bug Zapper in this case is not a static defensive device. It is an autonomous, networked AI-coordinated swarm of expendable attack platforms operating across air, surface, and potentially subsurface domains simultaneously that cost $35,000 per unit, has no human pilot to deter, communicates with manned fighter jets and naval destroyers through a unified AI-coordinated operational picture, and was just validated in combat in the world's most strategically important waterway. The era of the IRGC Mosquito fleet as a credible instrument of strategic coercion in the Strait of Hormuz is over, not because the United States found a way to neutralize it with existing conventional means, but because the United States brought a qualitatively different category of response that the Mosquito fleet has no effective defense against. A response that improves as it deploys more units. A response that gets cheaper per engagement as manufacturing scales. A response that learns from every operational cycle and integrates that learning into subsequent targeting through the AI coordination architecture that links every autonomous platform in the network to the same common operational picture. The United States is now the guardian of the Strait of Hormuz, not as a diplomatic aspiration, as an operational reality validated by 4 consecutive nights of strikes, 300 destroyed Iranian military targets, and the combat debut of a weapon that moved through the water toward the IRGC's front door at 40 miles per hour with no pilot aboard, no radio link to jam, and no hesitation in its programming. The Strait will never look exactly the same again, and the weapon Iran never saw coming has just confirmed in the most operationally definitive way possible that it is not going away.